Hello and welcome to the Wake Up Podcast. My name is Caroline Wong, and today I'm joined by Tim Silverline. Tim, welcome.
Yes, thank you so much for having me here.
Tim, talk to me about what does a fractional CISO do, and how does it feel to be a fractional CISO?
Yeah, so a fractional CISO helps different organizations essentially lead their cybersecurity program, and but you're not doing it full time, right? So, in some ways, it's really good and really fun to be a fractional CISO because you get to experience lots of different organizations and understand all the different challenges that they're going through. And on the other hand, it can be somewhat stressful because you're responsible for the cybersecurity for multiple organizations, and there's just a lot to worry about from the different threat landscapes that exist in all these different organizations. So it's also in some ways challenging because you don't ultimately make the final decisions in these companies, right? You're just advising them, and you're hoping that they follow your advice, but at the end of the day, it's really up to them to follow through with all the different suggestions that you're providing.
Tim, can you tell me about a time when you were advising a company in a fractional CISO position and your recommendation was not exactly accepted or followed?
Yeah, so there was one organization who I was advising for a while that had experienced several different ransomware attacks, and I helped them significantly bolster their overall security. We worked on making sure that their backups were done on a regular basis and tested. We made sure that their alerting was all in good order, so they were able to see and get visibility onto the endpoint. And at one point, I actually moved on to a different organization and stopped advising them. Spent some time with them as I was leaving, making sure that they understood what they needed to do on a reoccurring basis. And unfortunately, a few months after I had left, they experienced another ransomware attack. And what happened was they actually did not follow all the things that I had trained them with, or had trained them to follow before leaving. And so their endpoint had been taken over by a remote attacker that had logged in without MFA, which was one of the things that I strive to make sure that they had required. Their endpoint security solution detected the attack, alerted them multiple times, but those alerts were not actually triaged. They did not follow up on them, and the attacker ended up was able to understand all the financial situation of the company, so they could figure out what sort of ransom they wanted to demand. But also they were able to uncover the full underlying infrastructure of the company and figure out how to encrypt their underlying storage, their entire VMware infrastructure, and all of their backups.
When this was unfolding, when you got the email, when you got the call, how did you react? What did it feel like to have prepared these folks?
Yeah, I mean, when I got the call, it was interesting because their systems were down and they didn't know what was going on, and they just needed some assistance to uncover what exactly was happening. And so first it was just, it was an interesting call because, again, I was no longer employed by this organization or even the company that I was working for who had contracted me out to them at the time. But I wanted to help because, I don't like seeing companies struggle. So just logged into their system, and first it was just figuring out what happened. And then once we found the ransom files, understood what had happened, and understood the extent that they had encrypted everything, it was a challenging time for me because it was like I had spent so much time trying to make sure that they would be resilient in this event, and all of those protections that I had put into place failed essentially. And they failed because you need somebody at every company that's ultimately accountable for the security of their data, of their business. And they didn't continue that accountability after I left because they were just kind of using me, or not using me, but assuming that I would cover all of that for them.
Tim, I think sometimes organizations, they misunderstand and they think that cybersecurity is like a one-time project. They do it, they hire someone great to do it, and then they're done and they're good. And I'd really like to know what you think about that.
Yeah, cybersecurity is not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing cycle. You need to make sure that you are constantly on top of the evolving threat landscape, that you are, making sure that you're ingesting all of the alerts properly, that somebody's triaging those alerts, and that you're following up on them to make sure that you're keeping your company secure.
Tim, you had put so much into helping this organization. You'd put the policies and the procedures in place, you'd train the folks, you'd given them all sorts of leave behind. When you found out that they kind of hadn't been doing what you'd hoped they'd do, what were some of the emotions you experienced? Would you say it's disappointment? Were you upset? What was that like?
I was disappointed and upset, but I also felt personal shame. I felt that my efforts had failed. And even though I knew it was not my fault, I still felt personally responsible for it because the program that I had put into place was not successful, and then they experienced this terrible attack.
Yeah. It's very clear to me that as a CISO, whether full-time, whether fractional, you take the accountability and the responsibility very personally. And I wonder what it's like in situations where you've been kind of holding on to the responsibility for multiple organizations at once. How do you manage that?
I end up spending a lot of time thinking about the security situations for the different companies outside of my working hours. One of my big hobbies is cycling, and I'll go on rides, and pretty much the entire ride I'm just thinking about the different companies and the different potential threat attacks that they're under, and different ways that we can try and improve their security to defend against those.
In the ransomware attack that you worked so hard to defend and prevent against, can you tell us what was the outcome of that attack?
The outcome was the ransom was both paid and the recovery was not initially successful. They ended up having to roll back to ancient backups essentially to get the company back online. So this company was a product distributor with 50 locations around the U.S., and their operations were substantially impacted during a course of about a month.
Tim, is there anything else that you'd like to share with us regarding this particular incident?
One of the things that became apparent to me was, you just have to make sure that you're looking at every piece of your overall infrastructure stack, and it might not be a piece that's governed by cybersecurity. Like in this case, they were running a hyperconverged infrastructure, and the biggest issue of all that they faced was that they had not changed the password for that for the root user for the underlying hyperconverged infrastructure. And so once the attacker gained access into the environment, they just ran a brute force attack against that system until they were able to gain access and encrypt the root underlying disks. And so that was something that wasn't governed by security. That was something that was maintained by the data team. And unfortunately, the password of that system not being set up in a proper way impacted the whole company.
Tim, we've talked a little bit about fractional CISO and what can go wrong when that fractional CISO is no longer engaged with the organization. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about how can you proactively approach roles and responsibilities to ensure that an organization has in-house accountability for when things happen?
I think that mainly you have to make sure that you have buy-in from the executives at the company, right? Whether that's the board that's overseeing them or whether that's the CEO. You have to make sure that those roles and responsibilities are, all the way up to the top of the organization. So one of the things as a security leader is making sure that you reach out to all the different, C-level people, as well as the managers, directors, to make sure that they all understand both the role of cybersecurity in the company and that you're here to help make sure that they are successful in their jobs as well.
Tim, what do you do if they sign you for an engagement and they say to you, hey, we just We just want you to make sure that ransomware is never going to happen. How do you begin to make those connections? How do you reach out to stakeholders? How do you convince them that, you, this sort of part-time third party, is deserving of their time and attention?
Again, you have to find the stakeholder that cares. So if a company just hires you and says, make ransomware go away, but they don't personally care and they don't want to share that accountability, it's not going to be a successful relationship. And so, in my experience, you always have to find the people that care and then get them to work on their relationships with the other stakeholders to convince them that this is something that's important for the company.
Yeah, I just see there's such an interesting additional piece of work to not only do the fractional CISO job, but also to engage with all sorts of other stakeholders. I wonder if you can share some reflections with us about kind of comparing an organization that does not have appropriate accountability and then drawing a picture for us of what does perfect accountability look like?
So organizations that don't have accountability tend to believe that, often what I've seen is that many organizations that have not experienced a cybersecurity incident think that it's not going to happen to them. And so until something actually happens to them, they tend not to want to spend the money, invest the resources in putting together a proper cybersecurity program. And then once somebody experiences an incident, they tend to completely change, and then they understand the need for it. I don't think perfect accountability exists anywhere, because at the end of the day, cybersecurity programs need investment, and nobody has an unlimited budget to go spend everything that they can do to get every tool out there to completely protect every possible threat scenario. And that's why the idea of, 100% block ransomware from impacting my company, nobody can say that they're going to be protected 100%. That's why we see organizations like the government being frequently breached, and other very large institutions, including cybersecurity companies themselves, experiencing breaches. There's just no perfect way to block that, and that's why cybersecurity is continuing evolving landscape. It's why there is investment being put into it. That's why there's thousands of startups out there trying to solve the different challenges from a cybersecurity perspective. And obviously with AI now, it's completely opening that landscape up, because it's completely making the overall attack surface very, very broad.
Tim, how do you lead or facilitate a risk tolerance discussion with an organization that hasn't thought about that before?
Yes, that's an interesting question, and I think that an area of cybersecurity that's evolving right now is cyber risk quantification. And so when you're talking to people that are not technical, but that do have to understand from a risk perspective what it means to the business, it's really helpful to be able to quantify for them like what the actual financial impact could be. When you start actually are able to talk in dollars to somebody like a CFO and explain that this is the potential loss for your company, the loss expectancy, it allows those conversations to happen a little bit more easily, versus just saying, well, this is something you need to do, and go into the technical reasons on why you need to do it. Often you don't get a very good response. The other thing that you can do is just explain, from a business perspective, what is the actual impact? What does this mean to our customer if this particular thing happens, or what does it mean for your department if this particular thing happens? And so one of the I think important lines of communication to open is understanding the other leaders in the company and what matters to them the most, so that you can try and put into perspective what you're doing from a cybersecurity program and approach them in a way that they understand, by making sure that you're trying to help them and make them successful in their role.
Tim, I want to kind of connect two concepts that you've talked about. One of them is understanding what's important to your key stakeholders, and another is enumerating the worst case scenario for these folks. How do you approach an exercise like that?
Well, so understanding what the key stakeholders care about is just asking questions, right? You just need to go to them and try and understand, again, like what in their mind would be the worst thing for their particular department, right? And so CFO, it might just be financial loss. Somebody on the product team, it might be that a given piece of the product is not working on a given day. As far as worst case scenarios, that's something that you just have to think about, I think, and be able to present that in a way that people understand. So again, it really depends on your audience, who you're talking to, and being able to frame it in a way that explains what the user experience would be or what the experience would be for their individual department.
Tim, I'd love to hear about some of your lessons learned from your time as a fractional CISO.
I think that lessons learned are just that you need to make sure that, again, that you have good relationship with the key stakeholders, that you make sure that they're aware of the risks, that you try to quantify it for them in terms of what matters to them, either that's financial impact or it's actual business impact for what their key positions are. But that you also have to understand that your responsibilities end and the customer needs to take that accountability.
Tim, what kind of advice do you have for fractional CISOs or folks who are thinking about taking on a role like that?
Yeah, I think the most important thing for anybody that's considering being a fractional CISO is to truly understand the businesses that they're planning to support, understanding all of the potential risk profile that exists for them, the different attack surfaces that exist for that business, and then what's important to that business to make sure that you're helping defend against the important aspects of the business and making sure that they're resilient in their business operations.
Tim, I understand you're no longer in a fractional CISO role. What are you up to these days?
Yeah, so I'm just past the year mark at Rocket Lawyer, which is an online legal tech firm. We help customers with all sorts of different legal challenges what they're going through, whether that's creating documents for different life events or just maybe they're going through a situation where they need some advice. And so as part of that, I've been pleased to help the company in making sure that we're protecting all of our customers' sensitive data. We strive to be very good stewards of that data as we're helping people with different challenges. They're sharing lots of personal information with us, and so protecting that data is extremely important. And I've really enjoyed and have gotten a great amount of support from our leadership in making sure that we're continuing to mature the security program to ensure that we're protecting customers' data appropriately.
What's your favorite part about your current role?
My favorite part about my current role is honestly, it's the tremendous amount of support from the organization. So people across the board, whether they're in finance, whether they're in product, they all understand that it's really critical for us to properly secure our customers' data, but also provide the perception to our customers that we do take it very importantly. And so just the people at the organization are great, and it's really I've never actually worked in an organization where people have been so interested in making sure that we maintain security for the company. So, a lot of times in a CISO type of role, you're kind of often an island by yourself, and you're caring about things that the other pieces of the organization just kind of want you to maintain and do a good job of, but they're not overly interested in it. We have really good people, and they really care about ensuring security for our business.
Tim, I understand that you're a mountain biker and a competition-winning mountain biker. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about your accomplishments in that area, and if there are any parallels that you'd like to draw to security leadership.
Yeah, I focus a lot more on road bike riding, actually. But yes, it's a passion of mine that I do spend a lot of time when I'm outside of work doing. I mentioned earlier that I do actually end up spending a lot of time when I'm on the bike thinking about work and all the different challenges that I face in my daily work life. But One of the things about road bike riding is that you do have to be very persistent, and it's a lot about enduring pain to get to being successful in those. So, there was an event last year that I trained for, which was after suffering a car accident, actually, that impacted me physically for a while. And overcoming that was a good challenge for me, and actually getting into the best shape of my life last year. While coming back from an accident was something that was a big challenge for me, and I think that there are some parallels to that in security, because building a security program, especially from at a company that may not have had a very mature one, it's a long road, and it takes a lot of effort to both put the policies in place, making sure you're following those procedures, putting the controls in place, and then auditing those controls on a regular basis. So I think there is something to be said about the parallel, and when you start training for a race and you don't have the right level of fitness, it takes a lot of effort to get to where you're actually at a place where you can compete in an event.
Tim, thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your story today.
Thank you so much for having me here. This has been great.
This is Wake Up, a podcast by Veeam, global leader in data resilience. Join us for our next episode.